here's another important dimension, especially focusing on the communication as a leader of a great team. So we've spoken about understanding what is greatness, how do you build a team, different dimensions of leading a team, and we've been discussing a couple of different secrets. This certainly is an important secret, and I've worked with a lot of leaders from different organizations, and I've noticed a lot of them having this rather comfortable ability to use this. It's called the using of analogies and metaphors. In a leader's communication, the more analogies and metaphors and stories and anecdotes from your life you can use, the better would be the quality of your communication. Especially in terms of being able to influence, being able to drive home some key points, being able to convince others, being able to build that sense of charisma and get your team members to look up to you and say, wow, and be inspired by what you're inspired by. Let me give you a couple of anecdotes and stories about analogies. The first thing is, I've looked at several books, and some of the most powerful books are books which have stories and analogies and metaphors. For example, even a popular book like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People has a lot of stories in it. It's a very strong style of communicating a message across, even if it's only in writing. The whole series of books called The Chicken Soup for the Soul, and the chicken soup for the teenage soul, the chicken soup for the young soul and the old soul, and you know, all sorts of chicken soup books. If you ever picked one of these and read it, you would know that these books are just a collection of stories. They're a collection of stories from different people, real people who've gone through hardships of various kinds and overcome those hardships. And that's really what this chicken soup phenomenon is all about. Try to get your hand on one of these and go through it, and you'll get an idea of the power of stories. The other thing is another way in which stories help. There's a difference between, and I told you I'll give you a couple of examples. The first thing is to get your hands on books which have a lot of stories. The second point is, if you're going to talk to somebody in your team, and maybe the person feels that what they're doing, imagine you have a team member and you've recruited a great team, and this is not to say that you will never encounter resistance, you will never encounter any kind of problem. When you do so, you meet somebody in your team who, say, is supposed to work on a certain aspect of a project, and is saying that, I don't see the point. Why should I do this? And if you tell that person, no, you just have to do it because it's important, that's just not good enough. But if you tell that person, when I started off, I had the exact same attitude. And I used to work for this company called XYZ. And I had a manager who made me do certain things. And one of the things which I hated was documentation. And I just didn't like doing documentation. But then he just pushed me to do it. It was the rules of the company. But because I did it at that time, today, when I have to manage a team, when I have to lead a team of people, and that to a great team like you guys, I know how to deal with the nuances. I recently met somebody who was in the merchant navy. And he said he spent the first year when he was on board, when he was on the ship, just doing menial jobs like painting, cleaning, polishing. He said there was a lot of cleaning, helping out in the kitchen. He was just like one of those support staff for menial tasks. And what this did was, it helped him deal with a lot of things which later, when he became a captain and somebody said they need more paint, he knew what that meant. He knew what to say, because he's saying that, look, I've painted this myself. I know you don't need more paint. So what I told you just now, what I gave you just now is an analogy or an anecdote of something I've heard from another person. And what I told you a little bit earlier about somebody in your team showing resistance is another analogy. Okay? So the point is, analogies and metaphors are a really powerful way for leaders to communicate. When you use analogies and metaphors, you can push, you can use power, you can use influence without being pushy without coming across as a difficult or a tough taskmaster. And that's the power of analogies and metaphors. One of the suggestions that I have for you, and maybe this is an exercise that you can do, if you worked long enough to be leading a great team like you're doing now, if you've had the experience that you have, it's important for you to collect stories. And maybe I would do this: open 2 Word documents, or take 2 different sides of a book, or 2 sheets of paper, whatever you like. 2 sheets of paper might be a little too less, so maybe 2 Word documents would be the smartest thing to do. Call one of them My Stories, call the others Stories I've Heard. And I want you to make note of every single story. For example, the story that I just told you about the captain from the Merchant Navy, maybe that story is called Menial Jobs in My First Year in the Navy. This story is called From Hating to Loving Documentation. Just write down the name of the story. Let a lot of them be your own stories, because then you will be a leader who speaks from experience. And of course, a lot of them would be stories that you just collected or you heard. If that's the case, it's important that you mention where you got the story from. For example, if I told you there's a book with a lot of stories and there are many books with lots of stories, you should read them, that just doesn't sound credible enough. But when I tell you there is a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's a very specific book. You can go check in the library whether what I'm saying is true or not. There is a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul by Jack Canfield. You can go to the library and confirm if what I'm saying is accurate. So just like that, when you say this is a story of a friend, it's too general. But when you say this is a friend who went to school with me, or like I told you, this is a Merchant Navy captain, or actually a retired Merchant Navy captain who I met 2 weeks ago at a workshop in my city, this makes it more credible. So collect stories. That's the first step. Your personal stories and stories you've heard. The second thing is, put next to it the reason where you could use this story. This is a good story to convey an idea of goal setting to somebody. Is this a good story to tell somebody about working hard? Is this a good story to tell somebody that you can learn new things? Put those areas or applications of the story next to it. So you probably have numbers or serial number, the title of the story. Write it clear enough so that you can remember it. If this what I just told you, if I just wrote the name of the story as ship, that would be too vague. Later I might not even remember which ship. But if I say Merchant Navy Captain Menial Job, I know exactly which story it is. So write down the title of the story long enough so that you can recognize it later and you're not seeing stars when you read it. And in the third column, write down applications. Where could you use the story? For what purpose? Keep making a list of this. This is not an exercise which you have to stop the video and do right now. This is an ongoing exercise, but keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. And at some point, you'll realize you have quite a few stories and you've become a brilliant leader who can convey and convince other people and influence other people and lead a great team to success purely by good storytelling, using metaphors, analogies, anecdotes, and examples.